think that, there's a real contrast between them. Of course, J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School, went to Silicon Valley, now serving in the Senate. And Tim Walz, we're going to hear a lot about the school lunchroom and being a social studies teacher and the Army National Guard before coming to the House of Representatives and representing a rural district. And so despite some similarities in the backgrounds they may discuss, I think that we'll hear sort of a lot of differences in their backgrounds and also the ways that those differences have led them to very different policy views.
So let's take one more call before we go to the news break. And Brian, I know you're going to have to go. But let's take a call from James in Minneapolis. And James, what is your observation?
Hi, I'm just calling because I know my mom, who's a school teacher, is super excited that Walz is the vice presidential pick. I think that this presidential ticket has a real mom and dad feel to it, which is going to contrast a lot against Trump and J.D. Vance. And then I did have one question. I was wondering how everyone thinks that, do you think that this Tim Walz pick is going to be indicative of kind of the future that the Democratic Party is going to go to? Because I think there's a real difference in rhetoric between Joe Biden's "we have to work together," reaching across the aisle, and then you get Tim Walz coming out there and just calling the Republican ticket weird.
So, James, thanks. These are two great questions. So thank you so much for calling in. Brian, this,
It's interesting because if you listen to Tim Walz, who campaigned for governor in 2018, it was about one Minnesota, and he talked a lot about collaboration. Even in his early time in office, he would bring members of the other party over to the governor's mansion to have breakfast and just get to know them on a personal level. This more recent phenomenon where he's on TV calling the other side weird is something new, but it's part of the attack dog role that vice presidential candidates are kind of have to embrace as part of their being on the ticket. I don't know that it's indicative that he'll kind of change and kind of collaborating. He liked to get deals. He didn't always get deals with the legislature, particularly Republicans who controlled part of the legislature.
But he brought cookies to them, right?
But he brought bars. Every first day of session, he would bring them a pan of bars and just shake their hands. Yeah. And so, yes. And on the school teacher thing, I think it'll be really interesting. His former students could be big testifiers out there, particularly during the convention as they introduced Tim Walz. A lot of students have been putting stuff online about Mr. Walz, the teacher, and here's how he affected my life. Watch for more of that. And
Catherine, James' point about, does this ticket represent a shift in the Democratic Party?
Well, I think, it sort of reflects the deeply polarized era that we are in and have been for quite some time. But it is striking to see, the Tim Walz, who was in the House of Representatives, was pretty consistently rated as one of the more bipartisan members of Congress, even though, his voting record was in line with the Democratic majority. He did work with a lot of Republicans. And then, of course, Brian reflected on his sort of early career. But, I think he also wanted to be effective in passing a lot of Democratic DFL priorities when they had the trifecta. And we are just in a partisan, polarized environment that's, very competitive. And it's, the two parties view each other as two distinct teams. And so I think that's the reality that we are in. And maybe it does suggest that we'll be in that reality for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's just go right to the phones, Catherine. Right. I think we just go right. And let's go to Catherine from Minneapolis. And Catherine, what would you like to say?